Thank you for joining us here at the FPRN Radio Network. And we have a special guest tonight who did a documentary on GMOs. His name is Andrew Demeter, and I'm gonna let him tell, because I don't want to get anything, I don't want to say anything wrong, and I think it would be better for him to. Andrew, are you there, brother?
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. Thanks for joining us, and I figured it might be a little bit better for you to give a quick rundown of exactly what you did and why you're joining us tonight. So if you want to let people know who you are and why you do what you do and what you're doing right now, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure, of course. So I am here today, of course, by the likes of you, but also because I recently produced a documentary entitled We the People, Genetically Modified for an annual documentary contest that C-SPAN hosts, the television network. And essentially, they do this every year. As I mentioned, it's an annual contest for high school students. And the theme this year was what is the most important or pressing issue that Congress should address in 2014? So, being knowledgeable and politically active as I am, I thought this was a great opportunity. Originally, I was going to investigate drones or the NDAA, but a big part of creating this documentary was interviewing individuals who are specialists and experts in the field of the topic that you choose. And I contacted some local politicians for the NDAA and drones to discuss those things on camera. But of course, as you and really everyone knows anymore, politicians aren't really willing to talk on these divisive topics. So I eventually found out that even though it's still very controversial, GMOs would be a topic that would be a little less controversial, and I could kind of get people from various backgrounds. Like I interviewed a farmer, a scientist, a doctor, and even Ben Swan. So GMOs was kind of a broader topic. Obviously, it affects everyone. Nobody can live without food. So that's really why I chose GMOs as opposed to some of the other topics that I had initially wanted to cover.
So, what was one of the first things that you did in this process? Like when you decided that you were going to go in this route, what was the first step you made?
Yeah, the first step, I really create videos haphazardly, but the first step was probably finding the interviews because most people would logically research more about the topics and everything. But since I had already created a video report on GMOs and I've kind of been inundated with information through Facebook and other social media outlets, I really didn't have to do all that much research initially. It was really because I was introduced to this contest in November, so I really only had until the end of the year, December 31st, to interview people, and then I had about 20 days in January before the deadline to edit the video, script it, and do all my own parts as well. So the first part was finding people to interview, and that was difficult, as I mentioned. A lot of people just weren't willing to talk at all. A few obstacles that I encountered along the way. First of all, I was going to interview this local grocer. He was a health foods expert and specialist at this local grocery store. He was super excited when I first talked to him about it. Then about a week later, a few days before the interview was slated to take place, he canceled, saying my higher-ups essentially said that I'm unqualified to talk about this. And the same thing happened with a doctor who I had contacted through a liaison, a family friend who had talked to this doctor for virtually hours on GMOs, and then the doctor ended up backing out as well because he was quote unquote unqualified or whatever. So not only did I learn about a lot more about GMOs along the way, but also I found that there's really this barrier that people aren't willing to encounter or circumvent. That is, they're not willing to discuss this controversial information at the expense of possibly their job or whatever. So it's definitely an interesting process, needless to say.
Yeah, I mean, Obviously, a lot goes into it. And I know I definitely would say for the most part that every single person in my audience here knows what, GMO foods are. But just to be on the safe side, do you want to give a minute, a quick synopsis of what GMO foods are?
Yeah, sure, I can try, but of course, one thing leads to another, and I'll probably end up going on some rant, so stop me if you need to. But
I
a
certainly
GMO
will.
is the acronym GMO stands for genetically modified organism. Now, a genetically modified organism is essentially, if you want to kind of get this mental picture, it's when a scientist in a lab creates, well, not creates, but modifies an organism. It's kind of self explanatory, really,
Right.
but this is a process that can be used to enhance, as proponents of GMOs will like to say, the qualities or attributes of the organism in question. So this was done. It eventually wasn't marketed for whatever reason, but an example that I used in the documentary was a gene from a winter flounder, specifically the gene required to regulate that winter flounder's body temperature in freezing cold waters and keeps it alive. That gene or piece of information can be isolated from that flounder and then inserted into a tomato, for example. This was called the fish tomato. And then that tomato is rendered cold resistant. So that tomato could grow hyper theoretically in Antarctica. So the technology is definitely depending
So
on
wait,
which side of the
I want
spectrum
to
you
stay
look
with you
at it.
here. Now you just said fish tomato, right?
Right.
And so that's a real thing.
It was it was scientifically created and it was made in reality, but like I said, eventually it wasn't marketed. I'm not exactly sure the reason for that though.
Wow. All right. Well, the only reason I'm asking is because over the weekend, me and my one buddy and my other good friend of mine, Adam Kokesh, we went to CPAC, and just a quick side story. And I think I think he was eating something, and he made that analogy, and they were joking around about the tomatoes being, yeah, they're fish tomatoes, and I knew they were obviously joking about GMOs. So as soon as you mentioned tomato fish, I'm like, wow, dude, were they serious? Were there really fish flavored or fish hybrid tomatoes that were made?
Right. Yeah, it's not exactly taste wise that you would really perceive that, but yeah, the
Right.
technology is definitely there. And like I was saying, depending on which side of the spectrum you look at it, it's either really scary or breakthrough transhumanism. So yeah, it's a double-edged sword, really.
Yeah, well, and that actually ties in with the entire first segment I did, which was about transhumanism and Google Glass and exoskeletons that are now being introduced, and we'll get back more into that if you want. But yeah, that's exactly what's going on. So let me ask you this: what is the number one reason you find this a real big pressing issue on why GMO foods are no good, and this is a fight that you have decided to pick up?
It's to me the most pressing issue, undoubtedly, because food is a necessity of life. Without food, you don't have life itself, and therefore other issues can't exist. So that's really why I picked it up, and kind of the political ties that GMOs, the topic also has, being that there's this revolving door between agro industry and the federal government. We have people at Monsanto who are producing these foods and the pesticides. And then on the opposite side, we have these people in federal government who used to work at Monsanto and are now regulating their very own products. So it's definitely a conflict of interest. And that's one of the main things that was alarming to me. And then really the health side of things came after that. But there's definitely a correlation with GMOs and some of the adverse health effects we're seeing today. Whether that implies causation or not is really up to the lack of science that we have. But
Right.
that's really what got me interested.
Now, let me ask you this, and it's because it's what I do, and I have to ask you this. Now, the first part of this question would be, uh, would you say you are 100% against GMO foods?
No, I am not 100% against them. A One of the biologists or the biology professor that I spoke to in the documentary, she made a very good point in saying that the issue with GMOs above the issue itself is that people aren't looking at the issue with an objective lens, and they're
Right,
intermixing, if you will, the science and the biology aspect of GMOs
right.
and the business practices that are obviously incompetent and corrupt on both the side of the federal government and Monsanto. So, to answer your question simply, no, I am not 100% against GMOs,
Oh,
but there's definitely a conflict of interest, like I
no,
just
no,
said.
I totally agree. That's a great answer, and me doing my best to be, and then of course I have my own opinion, which I fully admit to, but trying to be as objective as possible. I try to play the devil's advocate, and come from the opposite angle. So, what would you say to somebody, who and you're not one of them because you just admitted it, but there are a lot of people that are 100%, no GMOs. Okay. Now, I do understand where they're coming from, but I just like everything else, it's not so much the technology as it is the people who owns this. What would you say to somebody that says, why are you against GMOs? What if you could take the amount it takes to make one loaf of bread, and you could make 10,000 loaves of bread, or use that same analogy for a vegetable or a fruit. If they could perfect it to where there are no side effects and it's not harmful, what how would you argue that point?
Well, I think there's definitely something to be said for that because there's not necessarily conclusive evidence that GMOs or GM seeds do, in fact, improve crop yields. But I think that it's important to, like you said, weigh the consequences and the different opposing sides of the argument because one of the facts that I mentioned in my documentary was that rice has been in some places genetically modified to enrich the vitamin A in it to mitigate blindness worldwide in some third world countries that for whatever reasons are deficient in vitamin A and therefore become blind. So I guess it's really up to the individual, but if we can mitigate these harmful effects that are happening with lack of nutrients and stuff around the world, then I think that's a good thing in essence. But again, if currently GMOs are really being tested on guinea pigs, on the guinea pigs of humanity, and we really don't know what types of effects these foods may or may not have in the future.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you, and it really comes down to, the basic thing that we're constantly fighting is the people in power. They just can't be trusted. I mean, first thing that pops into my mind, the medical industry. How can you trust the medical industry that that they make their living off of making a profit off of making you sick?
Right.
Their idea is not to get you better, it's to keep you sick without killing you. Waiting until you're old enough and then they'll kill you. So these are the problems. A lot of these amazing technologies, Google Glass and the exoskeletons. Yeah, that'd be great, but the military industrial complex, seems to grab that up, and drones. They want to, what's the first thing they think of with drones? Oh, let's taser them, or let's add tasers to them so we could, tase people with drones and sub. Now, and I played this video earlier. I don't know if you saw this, but where they have drones now that could, if it's given a command by somebody because it has a video on it, it could subdue the person by shooting them with a taser. Now, if you really break down what they're saying, they could subdue a person until somebody else gets there. That means it's one of the tasers that will shoot something into you, and it has like a wire connected to it. So that means every time you try to get up, they're gonna make sure you stay down with like what was it, like 80,000 volts or something crazy. So that's a drone, and they're weaponizing them, and we're seeing them pop up all over the place. Domino's Pizza wants in on the action, Amazon, Google, and I mean Amazon and Google, you're talking two of the hugest companies in the entire planet. So I mean, yeah, there's a lot to be concerned with, and I don't know, how do you feel about that aspect of it?
Yeah, I think the drone you're talking about specifically, I heard that that was at South by Southwest in Austin, I believe, but yeah, I actually have been doing a lot of research on drones lately, and when you really investigate these issues, though, you do see both sides of the argument instead of just your preconceived notions, because there are some different aspects to drones that aren't inherently bad. Like drones could be used by firefighters to map out a 3D location or 3D map of a house to find where people are. So, like with all technology, really, it's a double-edged sword.
Right.
But I also think there's something to be said for the almost desensitization of people through the use of drones, like with Amazon and Domino's, like may potentially be rolled out in the future. So it's really hard to get a single stance on at this point. It's really just a matter of looking at things objectively. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised with whatever new technocratic device or gadget comes out in the future.
Yeah. I mean, the way I look at it is I remember being a kid, and I know this goes pretty much for any age, but I remember being a kid and finding out that, oh, there was what, B-52 bomber or whatever it was. And they said, oh, this came out so much longer ago. So if we're seeing things now, okay, this is what they are allowing us to see. And uh, in my opinion, our iPhones and GPS and whatever, even now, these four propeller drone type deals that are on the market for sale. I think Google Glass just came out of beta phase. So all of these things, in my opinion, I think are just scraps from the table. And as amazing as they are for us, compared to what the government and the military has, I think they are literally like leftover, just scrape it off the table and, throw it at the people. Because, I mean, we've seen the nation and the world's wealth been robbed by these oligarchs, these, plutocrats, the people in power. So you have to ask yourself, what did they spend all that money on? We know they spent a huge portion of it on their deep underground military bases, and people could call us conspiracy theorists all they want, but I mean it's fact. So there's a lot of money that goes into that. The military budget literally is more than and everything else that the United States pays for put together. It's something like 50. I don't have the number right in front of me. It's something like 57%, I think. But I mean, it's just off the meter crazy. And then I hear Lindsey Graham make a statement like, "We've been at war with Afghanistan or Iraq, one of them, for 10 years now." And then when you put that in comparison to like World War II, like it was World War II and it didn't last this long. And they're selling this story to the American people like, yeah, the war on terror, the war on drugs. And people at the same time want to say, it's the land of the free. Well, Americans make up 5% of the world's population, yet 25% of them are incarcerated. So, they have more of their own citizens incarcerated than any other nation by far on the face of the planet. It's kind of hard to make the argument that, you're the land of the free. And I know I went on a bit of a rant there, but you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, war is definitely profitable, and we've obviously seen that, but I find it ironic and comical, really, how the establishment is mongering all these wars abroad, intervening where we need not intervene, and we're still, or the government, the establishment is still complaining about this national debt that it's racking up because of these offshore banks, and it's just ludicrous that instead of focusing on domestic issues and focusing on problems at home like healthcare, as we've seen, we're perpetuating those problems overseas and making the lives of other people worse, and we're not even bettering our own lives here at home.
You know what, that is an excellent point. We talk about that, very often. Is they use these terms, we're spreading democracy. Now, number one, I mean, just using the term democracy only shows me that these people truly don't know what they're talking about.
I mean, we
But
don't even
then
have
the
democracy
fact that
here
they're
at home,
gonna
so
they're
how
gonna
are we supposed to have people vicariously live through that overseas? It makes no sense.
yeah, and imposing it, we're gonna kill you until you're free. Like it's just absolutely ludicrous. But Andrew, we're close to the hard break, and hold over because I think we got plenty more to talk about. Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to Silence is Compliance on the FPR Radio Network, broadcasting live, syndicated across the internet, right on the border of FEMA Region 2 and 3. And we have plenty to talk about. We're going to go to a quick break, so do not go anywhere, and we will see you on the other side.